9 years in the great stage of Ohio. I think he gets it. Dripping with humility and class. There's not another man on this earth who I would want leading this program. That's from Bobby Carpenter talking about Buckeyes coach Ryan Day after a huge win over Michigan. Bobby Carpenter joining us now, brother. Let's just start there. What did it mean? Because, look, I do phoners in Ohio. The number of times that I talk to radio stations in Ohio and they tell me a national championship doesn't matter because Ryan Day can't beat Michigan. What does it mean for Day and the program that they finally get that monkey off their back?
I think it's a big deal, obviously. He won his first game in 2019, but it's been so many years since that's happened. They had COVID, they've had 4 losses. And, right, wrong, or indifferent, we talked about when they expanded the playoff with college football, lose its fastball, which meaning, every game in the regular season matters. All these rivalries matter. And while they may mean less in the grand scheme of your record and ability to accomplish your goals, the emotional impact it still has from losing to one of your rivals is incredible. And for Ohio State, this is the game. It's something they've leaned in on. And I give Ryan credit. He's been here now 7 years, and he's starting to do it his own way. And coming in as a first-time head coach, taking over for Urban, he kind of inherited a lot of, maybe what he was doing. But I think winning a national championship last year, guys, that liberated him. And now you're seeing a guy that has really grown into being, in my opinion, one of the finest head coaches in college football.
This is one of the greatest rivalries in sports, not just in college sports. So it's always going to be high emotions. It's always going to mean a lot, but it was palpable. After that game, you could feel it, that it was just this sense of relief of like, we finally get back in the win column against this team. I do want to talk about what the defense has meant to Ohio State all season long because it's nasty. But I want to talk about Julian Sayin because I don't think that we are talking about him nearly enough. The highest QBR in college football. If you were to make a case for Julian Sayin to be the Heisman Trophy winner this season, what would be your case?
Well, I think it just comes down to efficiency and how unflappable he's been. And, the guy, his completion percentage is hovering right around 80%. I think he set the regular season record passing Bo Nix on Saturday. And so, he has great weapons on the outside, but you show me a great quarterback who doesn't have great receivers. And, that guy really doesn't exist. You need to have players around you that help you. But for being a redshirt freshman, a kid from Southern California, going into a game where it was, in the high 20s, low 30s, and throwing an interception right off the jump, and then being able to bounce back, being unflappable, I think that's the thing that's impressed me the most about him is how he's been able to be a leader, how he stayed consistent, and each and every week he comes out and performs.
He looks like he's 12 years old in that picture. I just can't get over it. He looks so young in that. I'm just saying, Caroline, he looks so young.
He does look like a baby. He is a baby. He's not playing like one. And neither is this defense. Where would you rank this Ohio State defense in the history of great Ohio State defenses?
It has a chance to be right near the top. Now, so much of that, Caroline, comes down to how you finish and how you play well in these big games. But, against Texas and against Michigan, you're holding those teams to single digits. I want to say they've done that like 7 or 8 times this year, averaging about 7 points a game. Matt Patricia's been a huge, huge part of it. A guy that some people questioned the hiring when Ryan Day brought him in. They looked at what maybe he did in Detroit or maybe post-New England or maybe as an offensive coordinator. But he is one of the smartest coaches I've ever been around. He cares a lot about his players. I think this team has an opportunity that it could even be better than last year's defense, which I thought was maybe one of the best in the pantheon that they've had. And this year they've got a ton of really talented players. They played great in big moments. And we'll see. They're going to have a chance here against Indiana, who, in my opinion, is one of the best teams in the country. They've got probably the other front runner of the Heisman Trophy in Fernando Mendoza, who has been unbelievable. They're physical. They like to run the ball. And this will be a huge challenge for them. But if they're able to, answer the bell with that and continue to play really well throughout the rest of this playoff run, well, we'll see. They may end up being the very top.
All right, Bobby, I'll be the old man in the room for a second because I was living on tour buses trying to make it music back in the early 2000s. You were playing the game at that point, right? So our producer came in and said, this Ohio State defense, best of all time. I said the 2001 Miami Hurricanes would like a word, but I want your expertise on it because you were playing right around that era. Does this year's defense have the chance? Great run. Do they have the chance to be better than the 01 Hurricanes?
I think they're going to have a number of really talented NFL players. Like you start looking at talent on the team. They're going to have a lot of first-round draft picks over this year and the coming years that are playing significant moments. The guy they're showing right there, Arvell Reese, has been absolutely phenomenal. And, he does it with class and humility. There's Sonny Styles, Caden McDonald, obviously Caleb Downs. They've been playing really, really well at a number of positions. Caden Curry was up for some awards here earlier this year. So I think they've got a chance to do it. But the reason that Miami team was so good in 01 is you watched them vanquish all comers. So they've got a chance now that they're going to be playing against the best of the best, other teams with elite offenses. And can you keep those teams under 17 points? That's been the goal. I think that that's a realistic goal. And if they can continue to do that, then you know what, Fitzy, I could conceivably give them that crown.
And this defense is going to face its toughest challenge yet in the Big Ten title game. You mentioned it, Ohio State, Indiana, unstoppable force versus immovable object. I mean, one of the best offenses in the country versus one of the best, if not the best defenses in the country. What does Ohio State have to do to beat Indiana?
Well, you say the best offense is best defense. I'll take it one step further. I think these are two of the best coach teams in the country. You look at what Kurt Cignetti's done at Indiana. They don't beat themselves. They're physical. They're tough. They're efficient on both sides of the football. They have a relentless leader there, and Fernando Mendoza. Defensively, you watched them go into Autzen and beat up Oregon. They beat them 30-20. They won by 10, and that was with throwing a pick six. Like, this team is really, really good. If they don't turn the football over, they're incredibly tough to beat. They played Ohio State pretty tough last year. It wasn't until they had a Caleb Downs punt return for a touchdown that kind of flipped the momentum in Columbus. So, going in there, Julian Sayin's got to be what he's been all year. He's got to be efficient. He can't turn the football over. This defense has to try to find a way to shut down that Indiana run game because you can't allow them to be two-dimensional. And then the last piece comes down to what you saw on Saturday. I knew as soon as Carnell Tate and J.J. Smith were dressed that this team was going to be good because they're capable of big, explosive plays on the outside, and they can do things that really no other team in college football can do right now.
So, Bobby, if this were number 1 Alabama versus number 2 Georgia, I feel like the entire world would be melting down about, oh, my God, this is the game of the millennium. We've never seen anything like it. What's it going to take for Ohio State, Indiana to start to get that level of attention?
Well, I think a little bit Indiana and Vanderbilt, they suffer from the branding disease where historically they've never been great. And so it's still in your mind. Both of those teams, I put them in the same bucket because last year they were both really good. Indiana made it to the playoffs. Fell a little short against Notre Dame, but you've got to be on the scene for a while. People have to be comfortable with you as a big brand. Boise State was able to kind of break through that as a group of 5 school. Then ultimately you had Clemson do that and got rid of the Clemsoning. Like, there's been teams that have been able to break through and do it, but usually, guys, it's the blue bloods. You look at the teams that have won national championships. A lot of times it's reoccurring characters. But in this new 12-team playoff world where there's the transfer portal, where there's NIL, and you see Indiana, a school that has a lot of financial resources, finally get good at football. Now you're finally seeing those resources, I think, get poured into football. And so, for it to be this, it's probably going to be like this in 2 or 3 years. They've got to be on the scene. But I think with Kirk Cignetti being there, I think you're going to see this Indiana team on the scene for quite some time.
And the emerging success of Indiana, Vanderbilt, not necessarily historical powerhouses. That's definitely cranked the temperature up on a lot of the seats of head coaches at some of these big-time blue blood premier programs. We saw it, Florida, Auburn, LSU, Penn State, all moving on from their head coaches. And I think it's largely because of the emergence of some of these smaller programs. But we talk about Indiana, Ohio State Big Ten championship game. We'll also have a clashing of other national championship caliber teams, Georgia and Alabama in the SEC championship game, BYU, Texas Tech, Big 12, ACC, maybe not so much. But how should, in your opinion, the committee view these conference championship games? Should the loser be penalized?
I'm not a fan of that. And I said this last year when they first started doing it. And, you had the conference champions were all getting buys. And this year it's a little bit different, obviously, with just going to straight seeding. But if you earn the right to play in your conference championship, you shouldn't get penalized for losing it. There's no way you should slide out. Now, maybe we could move seeding around a little bit. I mean, if Bama absolutely gets destroyed by Georgia, I don't think they should fall out of the playoff, but they should probably have that last at-large spot. But I'm not a fan of when you've done something so well throughout the regular season that you have a chance to play an extra game and then you get penalized for it. Because then what's the incentive for really playing in it? You can play it safe. You can get a home game, probably not get a bye, but then you also don't have to worry about going on the road. And so if we start to, incentivize big wins, which are key, you want to have those big wins, but then we start penalizing a loss that 95% of the rest of college football isn't going to be playing in. I'm not a huge fan of that. And I think that goes for kind of all the conferences.
All right, then if you were on the committee, how would you handle Ole Miss knowing that they now don't have an offensive coaching staff?
Gosh, that's rough. And those guys have done a great job. The bailout that they ultimately have is that they're going to say they don't have a data point of without Lane Kiffin as the head coach. So they can say, well, we just held him with status quo. They're probably not going to get a bye. Do they get a home game? Like, that's the question. Like, how do you handle that and how do you treat that? I think some of that comes down to ultimately how these schools play in the conference championship games and what that looks like. If you want to slide them back into 9 or 10, okay, I get that, without having Lane Kiffin, who, believe me, he is a monstrous part of this team. And, they're tasked with getting the 12 best, not the most deserving. And they deserve to be there. I think they are definitely one of the 5 or 6 best teams, 6, 7 best teams in all of college football. But Lane was a huge piece of that. So I don't think you can ultimately knock them out, but there will come some nuance to how this seeding comes out.
And you do a great job covering all of college football, Ohio State, the entire Big Ten. So when you look at this Penn State job, a college football playoff team, less than a year ago, now looking for a new head coach, if you were the AD at Penn State, who would you hire?
Man, I don't know. I guess it's a great question because, Pat Fitzgerald just got scooped up by Michigan State, and I think that's probably been the steal of this hiring cycle. I know Matt Campbell, they haven't been great at Iowa State here, this season, but I think he's a program builder and he's someone that gives you a lot of stability and knows the Midwest. And if you give him the resources, has the ability to have some success. People have talked a lot about Brian Hartline. Like, he's never been a head coach before, but you've seen what he's done in that receiver room at Ohio State. You've watched what he's done now as an offensive coordinator without Chip Kelly doing a masterful job on Saturday against Michigan. And then one of the things that's interesting, and I've heard some people throw this out there, and I don't know that you would ever get him to admit this, but I don't know how much Kalen DeBoer actually enjoys being the head coach at Alabama. And being the guy that follows the guy is never easy. And they might win an SEC championship on Saturday, and there's still people that aren't going to be happy with him. And so if that's the case, like, you have to ask yourself, what's happiness and where can I find it, and enjoying and coaching and doing what I love. So, I would say he's a huge dark horse. The sad thing is, like, a lot of these other coaches have been scooped up. I thought Alex Golish, who, grew up in Columbus, Ohio, he was a student assistant when I was at Ohio State, has done a great job at Florida. I think he'll do a great job at Auburn or South Florida. I think he would have been a tremendous fit. But it's going to come down to the uniqueness of that job. It's a kind of an isolated school in the middle of PA. And so there's a handful of guys that are out there. I know their AD. He likes to swing big. And so I'm anticipating that he has something in the bag, and he's just kind of maybe waiting to reveal this until after conference championship Saturday, or maybe even till middle of the playoffs.
All right. So, Bobby, before we get you out of here, not Ohio State, obviously, that's the team that you know the best. If you're looking at the rest of the lexicon of the college football teams that are going to make the playoff, who do you think's the scariest team out there?
I think Georgia's been playing really good football, and I always look at how are you playing at this moment. There's actually 2 teams that I think are playing really well and have been for about the last 6 to 8 weeks, and that's Georgia and that's Notre Dame. I know everybody gets into the Miami and Notre Dame argument. And I know Notre Dame hasn't played maybe the most vicious schedule down the stretch, but they handled Southern Cal. They looked really good against Pitt. And then Georgia's kind of the same thing. While they may have stumbled early and they're maybe not those dominant Georgia teams of back-to-back national championships, Gunnar Stockton's looked really good. Their defense is coming around, and they seem to make big plays at the biggest times. And, winning against Georgia Tech in a rivalry game, that matters. Those games are tough. They're always going to be slugfest. But those are the other 2 teams I would look at and say are playing some of the best football right now as we flip the calendar to December.
Follow him on Twitter at BCarp3. Check out the Bobby Carpenter Show. And then if you're ever lucky enough to be in Columbus, just find him in a bar, because I'm telling you, my guy never pays for a drink. All you got to do is be adjacent to Bobby Carpenter, and it flows free all day long. Bobby, appreciate your time, man. Thanks for joining us. Good luck watching the rest of the season.
And enjoy Chuck E. Cheese back there.
Absolutely.